Our heavy hitter here is author, writer. I mean, this is a guy who cares about people, and what he gave us in his new book, Holocaust Fighters, is something that this is not your typical boxing book. He wrote it. It was put out by Rowman and Littlefield. And Gerry Sussman, as we bring you on, Holocaust Fighters was one of the toughest books, one of the best books I have ever read, but yet it pointed out how cruel humanity can be, what humans are capable of doing to one another, and I'm talking about everything from slavery to what the Nazis did in World War II, leading through World War II with the concentration camps, Auschwitz and Buchenwald and all the rest of them. Over 6 million people were slaughtered by the Nazis, and the stuff that went on. Your book was so enjoyable that as I read it, I learned, I cried, I had all kind of emotions in your book. Gerry, how did you come up with this, and what kind of research did you do for this?
Well, I've always been interested in boxing. As you know, I've written previous books about boxing, and I've always been interested in boxers. And I heard about one of the boxers, Harry Haft,
Yes.
Who had won 76 heavyweight fights as an inmate at Auschwitz, and how he had come to the United States and tried to become a professional boxer. And eventually he was matched against a young Rocky Marciano in an arena in Westchester County. That was before Rocky became well known. And while he was in the dressing room preparing for the fight, 2 mob guys came in and told him that if he didn't take a dive, they were going to kill him. And he knew that was serious because they had killed another boxer, a few weeks earlier. And it seemed so terrible to me that here was a guy who survived Auschwitz, had 76 fights, any one of which he could have lost, and that would have resulted in his being dragged off to a gas chamber and killed. And then he comes to America. He hopes to have a successful career as a boxer, and the mob takes it away from him and ruins his life. I mean, after everything he went through, it was just amazing that happened to him. Well, anyway, that opened the door to my wanting to investigate the lives of other fighters, and there were numerous of them, and many of them were quite good professional boxers in the 1930s until the Nazis got a hold of them and ultimately destroyed them.
Well, you know, it seems like we went through different eras. There was a great Jewish community of fighters for a long period of time. I can't tell the dates, and it changed. Then it went to Irish, then it went to the Italian. But I mean, how could you find the research on all this stuff? It was such a horrific time to think that the Nazis could do such a thing.
I know it was awful. There was one a French featherweight fighter who became the youngest featherweight boxing champion in Europe, and there was a lot of information in French newspapers, and I can't read French. So a friend of mine who can was able to translate all of that stuff for me, and that served to a large extent as my research for a fighter named Victor Young Perez, who was killed in Auschwitz while trying to get some bread to feed himself and some of his colleagues. An SS guard shot him in the back of the head twice. And here was a man who became a huge celebrity in France and in Paris in the 1930s. He was a good-looking young guy. His mistress was the biggest female movie star of the time. And when the Nazis came in and conquered France, she betrayed him because she felt her future lay with the Nazis, not with this a Jewish boxer. And her betrayal led to Victor Perez being sent to Auschwitz, where he had to fight for his survival. It was just an extraordinary story.
Now, when you say that the guy fought Marciano, he was 70-something fights, That was in America. That wasn't in Auschwitz, right?
No, he had 76 fights in Auschwitz, and he won all 76 of them. And then he came to America, and he had a couple of, started out as amateur fights, and then he had a few serious fights, and they thought he was coming along nicely, and Marciano was an up-and-coming fighter, and they thought that they would team him with Marciano and see what happened. He was naive. His manager was naive, and they didn't understand, the mob's involvement in boxing, and it came too late. It came as a shock to him.
But he had escaped. He escaped over there and was in America now, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, thank God.
We're talking to author Jeffrey Sussman, who just wrote the book Holocaust Fighters. And Jeffrey, as I'm sitting here, and you could just about hear me taking deep breaths, because, again, this was one of the best books I have ever read, and one of the toughest books I have ever had to read. I almost was wishing that it was a fiction book, because I would have gotten through it a lot easier. But this is a true story, and as you're describing the guys getting into the makeshift rings and the punches that are landing, and one guy knows, I don't stand a chance against this guy. I can't fight. But he's fighting for his life.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And then he loses. And the things the Nazis would do to them, from drag them away, basically they were beaten up, they were half conscious. The Nazis would drag them through the dirt before they ended the guy's suffering, and sometimes would make them suffer even more. Now, how did you find out about some of that stuff? And I must tell you that I know some very elderly, the guys are in their mid-90s. They survived some of this stuff, and I wish I knew that you were writing this, because I could have actually put you in touch with a few of these guys. And years ago, they told me about some of these stories. And as they told me, I cried. Not believing that humans could do this to one another. And of course, our favorite sport, boxing, they even used it to torture one another and murder one another. But how did you find out some of these scenes? Or did you get pieces of it and then kind of, like a puzzle, kind of put them together?
Well, I was fortunate. I was able to track down the sons of Harry Haft and Nathan Chapow.
Right.
And they were very generous with their time in giving me information that was related to them by their fathers and what they went through. And it was very different to see how Harry Haft wound up and how Nathan Chapow wound up. Harry Haft, after having his career ended by the mob when he was supposed to fight Marciano, became a very angry man. He was a bad father. He mistreated his children, his family, and his son didn't realize until his son, I guess, was in his 30s, that the reason his father was like this is because of the terrible experiences he had that he had gone through. And he wrote this very touching letter, which he gave me to use in the book, forgiving his father, saying, I finally understand what you had to suffer, and please, forgive me for being so intolerant and unsympathetic to your suffering. I finally understand. And on the other hand, Nathan Chapow, who had over 100 fights in Auschwitz, was so pleased to have survived that after World War II, he went to Israel. He fought in the Israeli army for Israeli independence, and then he came to the United States and he opened a trucking company in Los Angeles. And his son said that he was just so full of life, so happy to survive, so happy to be able to see the sunshine, to breathe the air, that he was like the happiest man in the world. And the difference between him and Harry Haft was so striking. How one man was completely destroyed by this experience, and the other man was just so happy to be alive that he loved life like nothing else, and it was just extraordinary.
I mean, it had to be a painful read, a painful write to put this all out, to get all the information, and to think about the other people who have been through this trauma, this horrendous world. But it's also going to put a stop to this ever happening again.
I think so. I hope so. I certainly.
His name is Gerry Sussman. He wrote this incredible book, which I am so proud to have joined my other boxing books and the rest of my library. It's called Holocaust Fighters. Publishers, Rowman and Littlefield. All you guys did a great job and should be so highly commended. Where can people find Holocaust Fighters?
It's available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and other online booksellers around the country.
You want to read a great book, a true book, a book that will touch you every single way. Read Gerry Sussman's Holocaust Fighters. Gerry, thank you for giving us this piece of history. This was really an amazing book. You're an amazing guy. Thank you so much for joining us here on At the Fights.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've been a big fan of both of you guys for a long time, and I love your show.
Gerry, thank you, and thanks for putting that out there. And I didn't get a chance to get it yet, but I will be getting it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you, Randy.
Gerry Sussman here on Sirius XM's At the Fights. Our total honor to have this great writer, this great humanitarian aboard with us here on